So, you were talking about sincerity of heart, and you're going to use a lot of application, which is your strong suit.
You know, a lot of times when are you recording right now?
Mm-hmm.
Good. All right, so a lot of times when I've developed sermons before, I develop them with the intent of, let me give you 3 points, and then I'm going to make application at the end of it. This one's a little bit different. I developed it this way on purpose, where we're going to look at just 2 points. I know that's unscriptural. 2 points, and then after each one of them, we'll have an application part of that. So it's a little bit different, but I think it will mean a lot, because it's good for us to see what God is expecting from us, make application for it, but then leave us even to further conclusion of it, and then how it makes application to us, and then the overall application, and the final conclusion of it all. So
it is. It's not traditional, because, as you say, the traditional way is, all right, here's the verse we're going to study, here's 3 points about it, now here's how we make application. That's your traditional sermon. Yeah. But it probably will feel more normal. It'll feel more natural, easier to digest. It's like a meal. You eat first course, second course, third course. You know,
in my sermons, too, I'm very conversational about things anyway. Yeah. So this does feel very natural to me, even to be able to talk about this. We're ending this study of Crazy Love from Francis Chan, and so it's appropriate for us to talk about this kind of crazy love that we are to have. But it's not just any kind of love, like what we've been talking about. It is a love where the world thinks that we're crazy,
right? And
it's because we are radically in love with the God that we serve, and so that's what the basis of this is. That's what we want to define love as, is something that we are truly, absolutely, honestly, genuinely crazy in love with God. And so if we're going to be talking about that, then we have to talk about the sincerity of the heart, because God doesn't really care about our appearances. You know, God uses all kinds of people. We find that in Scripture. God uses people that are small, like David, but then God also, for his providential reasons, will use Goliath, who's huge.
Yeah.
You know, even in the story of David, you've got one King Saul, who was tall,
head and shoulders above everybody else. Yeah.
And then you've got David, who's the runt of the litter, if you will.
Right.
So, but God can take anybody, no matter who they are, no matter what color they are, no matter what language they speak, whatever talents they have. Yeah. God takes who you are and can use you. Why? Because he's not concerned about the outward appearance.
Right.
A lot of times we talk about, well, God doesn't care what I wear to worship. And he really doesn't. Now, we typically will wear nice clothes when we come to worship, because that's our culture. But God doesn't really care about that at all. God is still looking for something that's really special. He's looking for the heart.
Right.
And so that's really interesting to think about, and how that applies into our own lives. And if God is looking for the heart, that's a fantastic place to define where crazy love is. It's where the heart is, and it's not the outward appearance at all. And I love looking back at the story of David and how he became king, because it really shows that. You know, there's this passage in 1 Samuel chapter 16 and verse 7, and we quote this a lot, so I'll get it started. I bet you can even finish it. He says, but the Lord said to Samuel, do not look at his appearance or the height of his stature, because I have rejected him. This is talking about Jesse's first son, Eliab.
Right.
I've rejected him, for God sees not as man sees, for man looks at the appearance, yeah, but the Lord looks at
the heart.
The heart. Mm-hmm. So, you know, it's probably a very familiar passage to us, but one that we need to be reminded of. God was looking for a man that was going to lead Israel, who was 100% committed to serving him.
Right.
David is what? David is a man
after God's own heart.
After God's own heart.
Yeah.
You know, it's interesting in that context. That's not really said much of David. God tells us in chapter 13 of 1 Samuel that he's looking for someone who's after his own heart. But it's not really said of David specifically until you get to the book of Acts. Acts chapter 13, when it's rehashing all of Israel's history. And there it's described as David as a man after God's own heart.
Right.
And so it's really interesting to think about. That's who God is actually looking for. Is somebody that's after his. So the application for us is, well, then I need to make sure that my heart is like God's heart.
Yeah,
that's what it is.
It's very interesting. Well, it makes sense. It's very fitting why God would be looking for that kind of a person, where he would be most concerned with the inward, because he doesn't need a strong ruler. Who's going to win those battles? God is. Right? So you think about who's actually leading. I mean, David and Israel conquered Jerusalem from the Jebusites. David led that victory, but David is still just that runt of a boy.
Yeah.
So who made the battle possible? It was God, because David trusted God. That's why God cares about the heart, because that's the most part of me that's real.
Yeah. God uses strong people. He uses wise people. He uses godly people. And when we think about the most wisest person in the Bible, we think of Solomon. If we think about the strongest man, we think of Samson. Mm-hmm. When we think of the most godly man, we might picture in our heart David.
Sure.
And so God is able to use all three of those, but really he's looking for somebody that's absolutely 100% committed to him. So in Christianity, we would call this being Christ-like. If I'm going to be a man after God's own heart, then I'm going to be the most like Christ. And that's what we need to be. And to be Christ-like means that I love God with all my heart, with all my soul, and with all my mind. And there's nothing that's going to come between me and my God. And that's what Jesus says is the greatest commandment of all in Matthew chapter 22. And then he says the next command is to love your neighbor as yourself.
Yeah.
And that's the second commandment. But to be Christ-like means I love God with everything that I am. To be Christ-like means I love my neighbor. Well, that's giving God my heart. Mm-hmm. That's what he's looking for. He's looking for people that are willing to be absolutely Christ-minded and love God with everything that we are. And when we give our heart over to him, that's absolutely crazy love with him. And so that's what God's looking for.
And that's really the difference between sincerity and not sincerity. Because an insincere person can, okay, I'll toss you a bone, I'll give you something because I'm supposed to love you, but there's no sincerity there. You're not really doing what Jesus wants, because he understands if you are all in, fully committed, then the sincerity will naturally follow.
Yeah. And it kind of goes back to our first sermon of the year when we were talking about spirit and truth. I can go through the motions of my Christianity, but if my heart is not in it, or if my attitude is not right, then God's not really interested in that at
wasting
all.
Your time.
You're wasting your time. So God's not looking for mediocrity. He's looking for something where we're 100% giving all in commitment to him, our whole self. So God is looking for our hearts to be sincere. And to be sincere of heart is where a Christian is honest, they are true, they are open, and they are humble. And that's difficult to do. Mm-hmm. The Pharisees, they had to learn this the hard way.
Yeah.
Jesus, over and over and over again, gave those Pharisees the hardest time. And they rightfully so needed that.
Yeah.
They needed that correction. You know what, Matthew? Honestly, I think Jesus would preach the same kind of sermon to us. What he says in Matthew chapter 23. I after reading through this and studying it, I see such great application to our own lives. Let me show you a couple of things that I think are interesting. First of all, he begins to expose everything that the Pharisees are doing wrong in their religious life. Mm-hmm. He says Jesus says, the scribes and the Pharisees have seated themselves on the chair of Moses. Therefore they tell you to do and observe, but do not do according to their deeds, for they say things and they do not do them. See the hypocritical problem that they've got going on? So what they're doing is they're binding on others, but they're not willing to practice their own faith the way that they're supposed to do. And that's one problem. Another thing they were doing is they were doing works to be seen of men. They just wanted the glorification of themselves more than anything else. They wanted to be treated special, and they wanted titles that really made them feel special. And that was a big problem as well. Another thing that they do, he over and over again says, woe to you scribes and Pharisees, hypocrites, he says, because you shut off the kingdom of heaven from men, and you do not enter yourselves or allow those who are entering to go in. And so Jesus is saying, listen, you're keeping people from becoming a part of this kingdom that I'm establishing. And so that was another problem. Well, sometimes even in our own lives we do that kind of thing. And that's a scary thing. Another thing that they did wrong is they were using religion to take advantage of other people, and that was a big problem as well. And then the fifth, woe unto you, scribes and Pharisees. Here he says that you travel on sea and land to make one proselyte and become, and when he has become one, you make him twice as much. And this is strong language. Son of hell, as yourselves is what he says. That's strong language. And what Jesus is saying is, listen, you're just breeding people who are just like you.
Right.
And that's a problem.
It's a roundabout way of condemning them for
yeah.
And
so
strong language.
Very strong language. And then he says, woe to you, blind guides, who swear by the temple, but the temple is nothing. You swear by the gold of the temple, and you swear by all these things. And what they're doing there is that they're binding their opinions and their doctrine. And what they needed to do was, well, what we try to do in our own lives. We want to speak where the Bible speaks and be silent where the Bible is silent. A long history in the Church of Christ to go back to that restoration time where that phrase was used. Yeah. And we need to keep using that phrase. Let's speak what the Bible speaks and be silent when the Bible is silent. And stop majoring in the minors and minoring in the majors. That was another problem that they did. But what I really want to focus in on is what Jesus says in verse 25 of this. And I want to just read it to you. And then you tell me what you think their problem is. He says, woe to you, scribes and Pharisees, you hypocrites, for you clean the outside of the cup and the dish, but the inside are full of robbery and self-indulgence. You blind Pharisee, first clean the inside of the cup and of the dish, so that the outside of it may become clean also. Woe to you, scribes and Pharisees, hypocrites, for you are like whitewashed tombs, which on the outside appear beautiful, but inside they are full of dead man's bones and are uncleanness. Even so you too outwardly appear righteous to men, but inwardly you are full of hypocrisy and lawlessness. So what do you think? From what Jesus says right there, what do you think their problem is?
Well, first of all, I love the phraseology of whitewashed tombs.
Yeah.
So notice they're not naturally like that. They've been washed and made clean to look like that, while the inside is what's rotting and dead. Yeah. They didn't just get cups that were naturally beautiful. They washed the outside, but they didn't bother with what the contents were on the inside. So there's very much a front being put on. It's like the exact opposite of what Jesus or what God said about David. The Pharisees don't care about the heart. The Pharisees care about the outward appearance. Yeah. It doesn't matter how rotten they are on the inside, as long as you think they are nice.
Yeah.
Because if you think they're good, then you listen to them.
Right.
They only care about their outward appearance.
Yeah. Their problem is a heart problem.
Right.
It's about being sincere. Over and over again, Jesus is calling them hypocrites. So it's a hypocritical problem. And people say, even today, they'll say, well, Alex, there's hypocrites in the church. Well, there are. We're all that way. There are times in my own life where I'll say one thing and I do another. But that doesn't necessarily make me a hypocrite. It means that I'm a struggling Christian, that I realize that there's a battle within myself of wanting to do what's right, and then I end up doing what's wrong. Or I'll say this is the right thing to do, but I don't always do that.
You're trying.
I'm trying.
Yeah.
And so there's a big difference between that. But a hypocrite is someone who doesn't care.
Right.
You know, they say one thing and then they outwardly, almost boastfully, will do whatever they want to do.
Yeah.
And that's the biggest problem. And
they're belligerent and persistent in contradicting their words.
Yeah. So if we're going to make application to our own lives, well, then God is looking for my heart. We know that. We've established that. God looks for the heart. But He wants that heart to be sincere, and that means that I'm going to be completely committed to Him. And so I have to make the decision that I'm going to depend upon God and not on myself. Proverbs chapter 3 and verse 5, trust in the Lord with all your heart.
Right.
And do not lean upon your own understanding. Well, that's easily said, and it's really difficult to do that.
Yeah.
But we have to decide that. And being hypocritical says that, well, I trust God. I'll say I trust God. But then I'm still going to rely on myself to be my guide.
Right.
Or being hypocritical means that I say, well, I trust God, but I'm going to figure out everything on my own. You know, I'm not going to give it over to Him. There's a funny song. I think it's a funny song. Jesus, take the wheel, as if Jesus is riding with us. You know, well, that idea is good because We need in our lives to say, you know what? I don't know how to figure all this out, but I know my God is powerful, and I know that He can understand everything that's going on, and I know that He can handle this. I'm going to let Him do that.
Right.
I'm not going to try to figure it out all on my own and make things work according to His will. I'm going to let His will work in my life. You see? You
can't tell Jesus to take the wheel while you control the gas and the brakes.
Right. You've got to just let him have it. Mm-hmm. You know, I think about Sarah and Abraham too. You know, both of them struggled a little bit with this. Sarah especially, when God had promised them a son, and it just seems like it wasn't happening.
Right.
And so what does she do? She takes matters into her own hands and offers Hagar to be with Abraham and to produce the son that becomes her own son. And then she sends Hagar off, and she raises Ishmael as her own. Well, that's taking things into your own hands, and that was not what needed to be done. Now, we understand God works those things out, and He worked that out in their own lives, but that's not the approach that we need to take. If we're going to trust God, then I have to 100% sincerely trust Him.
Otherwise, you're a hypocrite.
Otherwise, I'm a hypocrite. So that's the biggest problem. So you've got to make the decision that you're going to depend on God and not on yourself. You know, and another application of this is I've got to make the decision. We all have to make the decision that if I'm going to be rich towards God, then I can't figure out how I'm going to also be rich towards myself.
Yeah.
I think this is something that our world struggles with. Jesus says this. He says, no one can serve two masters. Either he will hate the one or love the other, or he'll be devoted to the one and despise the other. And here's the line: you cannot serve God and riches. You got to make your choice.
Right.
And so being hypocritical is saying, well, I serve God, but I'm not going to give financially to the church.
Yeah.
I serve God, but I don't let God guide my finances.
Yeah.
And that's something our world needs to handle, you know, or to understand. Because a lot of times in our own finances, it's very private. You know, no one ever says, hey, how much money you got in the bank?
Yeah, right.
Well, in our culture, that's rude to ask someone that. It's a very private thing. But between you and God, it does not need to be a private thing.
There are no secrets.
There are no secrets. God, He needs to be actively involved in your finances. So when you're doing your budget, and I can speak from experience here because my wife is an accountant, and we budget and we figure out down to the penny what we're going to spend. So, you know, the first thing that we have to do is we have to say, okay, here's how much money I've got coming in, and this is what I need to give to God first.
Right. Mm-hmm.
And then everything else takes care of itself.
You live off the rest. Yeah.
It's real easy for us. The rest of the world says, well, you need to pay your bills first. You need to pay all your debts off. You've got to buy food. You've got to pay your rent. You've got all these things. And then whatever's left over, you're going to give to God.
Well, they'll say whatever's left over, you give some of that to God.
Yeah, give some of that to God. Because you're still going to want some fun money later on.
Yeah.
Something else may come up. You need to save some money. And I'm not saying we shouldn't save money. I'm just saying...
Or have fun.
Or have fun. But our first priority needs to say, well, if I serve God, I'm going to give God my finances and let Him handle it. And let Him be a part of that first.
Right.
And it's not even, it almost sounds condescending to God to say, well, I'm going to let Him be a part of it. Really, it needs to be, I want God to be a part of my finances.
He demands to be a part of it.
He demands to be a part of it. And if we'll go ahead and have our lives focused in on that, then God is going to take care of everything. He'll take care of it all. I'm not saying that if you give to the church an enormous amount that you become extremely rich,
right,
you know, or anything like that. I'm just saying get your priorities straight first. Give God the first fruits. He's always demanded the first fruits. And now in Christianity, He's demanding the first fruits as well. That's loving God sincerely. Right. That's giving Him your heart 100%. And that's what He's actually demanding of us. One more little application piece to this that I think is really interesting. You know, we have to make the decision that if we say that we love God and we love the lost, then we have to love all of the lost.
Yeah.
We can't say, well, I'm only going to love people that are like me. Being hypocritical, saying, well, I want to save souls, but I don't want to talk to anybody about Jesus. Well, that doesn't work like that.
No.
If you want to save souls, you have to talk to the people about the person who can save their souls. Acts chapter 4, verse 12, there is no other name under heaven that can save people. It's Jesus' name. He's the only one. We have to talk to him about that. So if we love the lost, we've got to be willing to talk to people about Jesus. And we have to be willing to talk to the lost, even the lost that doesn't look like me. Even those people that don't have the same color of my skin, same economic status that I have. I have to be willing to talk to whoever it is or whomever it is. And that's being sincerely in love with God. I cannot be partial. James deals with this. Let me show you. I love this right here. James deals with this in James chapter 2. He says, "My brethren, do not hold your faith in our glorious Lord, Jesus Christ, with an attitude of personal favoritism." Yeah. And he gives a great example. He says, listen, if someone comes into your assembly with a gold ring and dressed in fine clothes, and then there also comes in this poor man with dirty clothes, and you say to the one that's rich, is what he's saying, here is special attention. Let me get you the best seat in the house. Right. But then to the poor man we say, you need to sit back there. Now in our culture we may say the best seat is in the back of the auditorium. Yeah. And we make the poor people sit in the front. I don't know. Well, it doesn't even really matter about the location, but it's the attitude involved. When we see people who are different than we are we passing judgment upon them and perhaps only offering the message of Jesus to people who are most like we are? Or am I willing to say, I have to go to everyone?
Well, that's that sincerity part of it, because they would argue, well, we let them both come to worship. Yeah, you did the thing, but your heart was bad because you said to this one, sit here, and the other one, sit over there. The sincerity is the problem.
And really, in our culture, let me give you a scenario. What happens to us is if we have someone that is less fortunate, that's the easy, politically correct way of saying it, right? But if we just clear the air and just say it what it is. If we have poor people come to church, what we'll do is this. Nothing. We see the poor people, we let them come and sit, they'll worship with us, and then we let them go home. And what we need to do is go out of our way to make them feel welcome, to see about their needs, and do whatever we need to do to take care of them. That's what the early Christians did. Right. And even in James's time when he's trying to correct that behavior, it's written there for a reason. We have to go ahead and say, this message of Jesus, this thing called Christianity, this kingdom of God, it's for everyone. Yeah. And so we may not say, well, the rich person sits over here, the poor person sits over here. But we'll certainly maybe just not even speak to the poor person. Or, and I say this from experience, because I've done it. I'm not pointing fingers at people and saying, I know that y'all have done this. I've done it. I'll see someone perhaps that's poor, and I don't even want to make eye contact with them. I'll keep my head down, not speak to them, and that's wrong. Yeah. And so I'm pointing my own fingers at myself here. I can't be a Christian and have an attitude of personal favoritism over one brother or another. It's wrong to do that. Being hypocritical is saying I love the lost, but only the lost that are like me. Right. And that's wrong.
Well, if you remember, you started with that statement by Jesus, one of his most famous statements. What is it? What is the greatest commandment? It's, well, yeah, love God with all your heart, soul, mind, and strength. Easy. Love your neighbor as you love yourself. Yes. I would want to show myself. My inclination is I want to make sure that I'm taken care of, and I'm going to be partial to myself. And yet Jesus says, love your neighbor like you love yourself. Yeah. How much do you want people to treat you? Yeah. Treat them that way.
Yeah. And people say, well, and they even ask Jesus, well, who is my neighbor? Yeah. Right. Well, in our society, your neighbor is he's black. Your neighbor is perhaps Hispanic. Your neighbor is poor. Your neighbor is educated or uneducated. Your neighbor is everyone. Everyone that's around you that you have the opportunity to make a difference in. That's your neighbor. And Jesus says, you love God and you love those people too. Yeah. Those are the two greatest commands. He says the whole law and the prophets are built upon that. Yeah. And he's right about that. The Ten Commandments were kind of divided that way. The first 5 of them deal with how we are to be towards God. Yeah. The last half of the Ten Commandments deal with how we are with each other. And so that's why he says those are the 2 greatest commands.
And to get back to the title of your sermon, Sincerity of Heart, here comes this poor person. Here, take your bag of food and go.
Yeah.
That's an action, but it's not a heart.
Yeah.
So you still condemn for it.
If I'm going to clothe people that are less fortunate than I am, that don't have the clothing that they need, then I not only clothe them and take care of them that way, I'm going to also make sure that their spiritual needs are met as well, and really show them that we love them, not just want to clothe them.
Because if you're insincere, you're just trying to get them out of the door and hope you don't ever see them again.
Right.
But that's not Christianity.
Just pacify them,
Yeah.
And that's not right. I don't know, time and time again, when someone has even come up to our offices here at the church building and they need help, I go ahead and I tell those people, listen, I can help you, I can feed you, I can give you the groceries you need, I can help you with gas, I can help you with clothing, but these are all temporary things. Mm-hmm. What really is important is for me to be able to show you the love that God has for you. God so loved the world, that he gave his only begotten Son. Whoever believes in him will not perish, but have everlasting life. That word "so," well, it's sincerity.
Yeah.
God sincerely loved the world that he gave. Mm-hmm. And he's demanding that same sincerity back to him and back to everybody else.
Yeah. That's
what he's demanding from us. Anyway, so I think that's a pretty good application. There's another good application that kind of goes along with this, is that if I'm going to love God with great sincerity of heart and be fully committed to him, then I have to make the decision that I'm going to give God everything that I can give him in the kingdom of God. Jesus says in Luke 9 and verse 62, he says, "No one, after putting his hand to the plow and looking back, is fit for the kingdom of God." Mm-hmm. What Jesus is saying is, you got to be all in. You can't say, "Well, I'm ready to work to be a part of this kingdom, but boy, I really got other things I got to take care of."
Right.
That's going in two different directions. That's what being hypocritical is really all about.
Yeah.
Is going one direction, but really looking back at another direction. So when Jesus talks about someone putting their hand to the plow, he's talking about somebody that says, I'm going to try to work for you, but really I'm looking. He says, you're not to be a part of the kingdom. Yeah. There's no place in the kingdom of God if you're not 100% committed. Yeah, 100% sincerely giving your heart to him. There's no place in it at all, which means that if I'm going to be committed to him, then if I say, well, I am a member of the church at North Heights. Well, if you are a member, then you need to make sure that you're not only putting your hand to the plow, but you're pushing that plow so you're not looking back and then heading over somewhere else.
Yeah.
If you say you're a member of the Church of Christ, but then you hardly get yourself involved, or you hardly plug yourself in, well, you're not fitted for the kingdom of God. And I'm not saying we don't want you here, but change your priority.
Right.
What we want is people that say, you know what, I'm committed and I'm ready to go. Now, we all have those moments where we're torn between different things, but get your hands on the plow and start looking forward.
Right.
To start working hard. Being hypocritical says, well, I'm a Christian, but I'm not really going to show my Christianity in kingdom work. And Jesus says that we can't be attached to him as the vine, mm-hmm. and we are the branches. And if we're not producing fruit, then we're cut off. That's right from John chapter 15.
Right.
So if we're going to be a part of the vine and we are the branches, then we've got to be producing fruit. We've got to be a part of kingdom work.
I love how those two metaphors really lead into the other, because you put your hand to the plow, that means there's work involved, but there's also fruit that's going to be produced because you're doing garden work.
Yeah.
Well, now look, are you going to be attached to the vine that you're now a part of, or are you going to be cut off because you're not doing the work?
Yeah, that's exactly right. So God's looking for our hearts, but he's not just looking for any hearts. God is looking for hearts that are sincere, that are crazy in love with him.
Yeah.
So the final application that's going to really bring all this together is just this simple little statement here. A sincere heart starts with a changed mind. Okay? The heart, the mind, they should work in sync. And Paul says this in Romans chapter 12 and verse 2. He says, "Be not conformed to the world, but be transformed by the renewing of your mind, so that you may prove what is good and acceptable and perfect, the will of God."
Yeah.
And so it's a changing of mind. The rest of the world is going to think that we're crazy. Well, we got to be okay with that. We got to be okay with that because we're not going to be conformed to the world. I'm going to be transformed. And it starts by what's in my mind. Mm-hmm. Because what's in my mind is what's going to be in my heart. I'm going to be sincere in that. We have to have sincere hearts that we've made up our minds to prove what the will of God is, and that which is good, that which is perfect, and that which is acceptable. And then, he says that verse 2, and that what really kind of melds all this together is one little simple verse that he has in the same context, because in chapter 12, he talks about the different gifts that people have, and he says, if you're going to do this, you give it with everything that you've got. But then in verse 9 of chapter 12, he makes this simple little statement that marries all this together. He says, let love be without hypocrisy. So what he's telling us is that if I'm going to be sincere in heart, and I'm going to love God the way that I'm supposed to love, and I'm going to love my neighbors, I can't be double-minded. Mm-hmm. I can't be looking one way and turning the other way. I can't act like a Christian and not actually be a Christian.
Right.
I have to be all in, 100% committed to Him. That's what love is defined to us. It's a sincere heart, loving God and loving our neighbors.
Awesome.